Look at them. They could work, they're able bodied, they're not sick, they made their choices, and their choices brought them here. We've all thought it. Maybe not out loud, maybe just for a second, the quiet judgment that crosses your mind before you even realize it's there. And the worst part is, it feels reasonable, it feels logical, it feels true. Because we've been told our entire lives that where you end up is the result of decisions you made to get there. Work hard, make smart choices, and you'll be fine. But here is what nobody told you. And here is what the science has now proven beyond any reasonable doubt. Poverty is not the result of bad decisions. Bad decisions are the result of poverty. And the difference between those two sentences is everything. Most people believe poverty is a mindset problem. That if you just think differently, work harder, want it badly enough, you can pull yourself out. And society backs this up with stories. The single mother who built a business from nothing, the immigrant who arrived with $20 and retired a millionaire, the kid from the worst neighborhood in the city who made it out. We love these stories. We share them. We use them as proof that anyone can do it if they really try. But here is what we never talk about. For every one person who made it out there are thousands who didn't. Not because they didn't try, not because they didn't want it, not because they made bad choices, but because something was happening inside their brain the entire time that nobody told them about. Something that made every single decision harder, every single day more exhausting, every single opportunity harder to see and harder to reach. And it wasn't their fault, it was biology. And the science that proved it should have changed everything, but it didn't, because it was easier to keep calling it a choice. In 2013, economist Sendil Mulainathan at Harvard and psychologist Elder Safir at Princeton published a study that should have made front page news across the world. They ran an experiment on sugarcane farmers in rural India. These farmers had one unique characteristic. Before harvest, they were extremely poor. After harvest, they were financially comfortable. Same people, same village, same life, just different points in the financial calendar. The results were staggering. The same farmers scored significantly lower on cognitive tests when they were poor, not slightly lower, the equivalent of a 13-point drop in IQ, the equivalent of losing a full night of sleep. Same brain, same person, same intelligence, just less money in their pocket. Poverty wasn't reflecting their mental ability, it was reducing it in real time. And once you understand why, everything you thought you knew about poor people making bad decisions falls apart completely. Here is what is actually happening. Your mind has a finite amount of cognitive bandwidth, mental space to think, plan, and decide. And poverty doesn't just take your money, it takes your attention. Every day when you are poor, your mind is running calculations that people with financial security never have to think about. Can I pay rent? Do I buy food now or wait until Friday? If the car breaks down, we have nothing. These thoughts don't visit occasionally, they run constantly, consuming mental bandwidth that could have gone towards planning, learning, and building. Mulay Nathan and Safir called this the scarcity trap, and it spills over into everything: parenting, health, relationships, work. Every area of life suffers when your brain is spending most of its energy just trying to survive the next 7 days. But the bandwidth drain is only the beginning. When you are poor, stress isn't occasional, it's permanent, and permanent stress floods your system with cortisol. In small doses, cortisol is useful, but when levels stay elevated for months and years, it starts destroying the brain from the inside, specifically the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for long term thinking, impulse control, and rational decision making. The exact skills society says poor people lack. The exact skills chronic poverty systematically dismantles. Researchers at the University of British Columbia found that children who grew up in poverty showed measurable differences in brain development, in regions responsible for memory, emotional regulation, and cognitive function. Not because of genetics, because of sustained exposure to the stress of not having enough. Poverty was reshaping their brain before they were old enough to make a single decision for themselves. And you have seen the result your entire life without knowing what you are actually looking at. Think about every time someone said just save more money to a person choosing between electricity and groceries. Think about every motivational quote telling someone to think long term when their prefrontal cortex was being chemically destroyed by the cortisol of not knowing how to make rent. The advice was wrong because it was given to people whose brains were operating under conditions that made it biologically impossible to follow. You cannot think long term when your brain is in survival mode. You cannot make optimal decisions when 13 points of your cognitive capacity has been consumed by the weight of having nothing. And here is the part that should make everyone who has ever judged a poor person stop completely. Researchers asked a simple follow up question: what would happen if you just gave poor people money? No conditions, no requirements, no financial literacy classes, just money. Results came back from studies in Kenya, Canada, Finland, and the United States. When people received direct cash transfers, their mental health improved, their cognitive functions improved, their children performed better in school, their long term planning increased, their impulsive decisions decreased, not because they suddenly became better people, because the cognitive bandwidth poverty had been consuming was finally free. The brain society had decided was broken was never broken, it was occupied. And the moment the occupation lifted, the same brain started making measurably better decisions, which means every system built around teaching poor people better values before giving them help had it completely backwards. They didn't need better values, they needed the mental space to use the values they already had. So let's go back to that person on the street corner, the one your brain quietly decided you chose this. What you were looking at was someone whose prefrontal cortex had been under sustained cortisol attack possibly for years. Someone running on cognitive bandwidth so depleted that the mental energy required to plan a way out was the exact mental energy poverty had already taken. Before they were old enough to walk, before they made a single choice. The judgment you felt wasn't evil, it was a story you were told your entire life, a story simpler and more comfortable than the truth. Because the truth requires us to look at systems, at structures, at who societies are built for. The story of a personal responsibility is much easier and much more convenient for everyone who has never had to live inside this trap. Given identical circumstances, identical people produce identical outcomes. The difference between someone who made it out and someone who didn't is rarely character, rarely intelligence. It is most often one moment where the bandwidth was available, where one single door opened at exactly the right time. That's it. One door, one moment. The people who made it out aren't stronger than the people who didn't. They were just standing closer to the door when it opened. The next time that thought crosses your mind, they chose this, just remember one thing. Nobody chooses a brain under siege. Nobody chooses to have their capacity for long term thinking chemically dismantled before they were old enough to understand what was happening to them. Nobody chooses the zip code they were born into, or the school that came with it, or the stress that never left. They didn't fail the system. The system measured them while it was breaking them, and then called the result of their choice.